The rain wasn't falling. It was throwing itself against the bus shelter glass, angry and cold. I hunched deeper into my coat, the one with the torn lining, watching the water swirl around the storm drain like it was trying to decide whether to drown or disappear. I was trying to decide the same thing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and it wasn't from the chill. It was the 3-day hangover, the hollowed-out feeling that follows a binge when the money and the booze and the excuses are all gone. My phone was dead, had been for a day, cut off from the last person who still pretended to care, my sister. I'd burned every other bridge, soaked them in gasoline of lies and stolen money, and watched them turn to ash. I was 34 years old, and I was a ghost. I'd left my rented room because the silence there was louder, full of the echoes of every promise I'd broken, most of all the ones I'd made to myself. So I'd walked, aimless, until the sky opened up. Now here I sat in a plastic chair that smelled of old urine and wet concrete, at a bus stop on a street I didn't know, in a city that felt like a stranger. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my gut. This is it. This is the bottom. And there's no way back up. I felt beyond saving, not in a dramatic, movie-ending way, but in a quiet, final way. Like a book that's been dropped in a puddle, the ink blurred beyond reading, the pages stuck together for good. A bus sighed to a stop, its doors opening with a mechanical wheeze. No one got off. The driver looked at me through the open door, a question on his face. I shook my head. He shrugged, the doors closed, and he pulled away, leaving me alone again with the drumming rain. That's when I heard footsteps, quick and light, splashing through the puddles. A figure darted into the shelter, shaking out a compact umbrella. A woman, maybe in her late 50s, with a kind, ordinary face and grocery bags in her hands. She gave me a small, polite smile, the kind you give a stranger you're sharing a temporary space with, and then looked out at the rain. I looked down at my worn-out boots, wishing I could vanish. I didn't need politeness. I felt unworthy of it. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the rain's roar. Then, she spoke, not looking at me, her voice calm and clear above the storm. "You look like you've had a long day, Mikey." The world stopped. The rain sound faded into a dull, distant hum. My breath caught in my throat, sharp as a fishhook. No one had called me Mikey in 25 years, not since I was 9 years old, in my grandmother's kitchen in Ohio. My name was Michael, Mike to the few people left. Mikey was a ghost, a buried kid from a time before everything went wrong. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. She was looking at me now, her eyes a soft, steady brown. There was no shock on her face, no confusion, just a gentle, knowing certainty. But to understand how I got here, to this shattered moment where a stranger resurrected a dead name, I need to take you back to where it all began. Before I continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. It means the world to me to know who's hearing this story. It began in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I was just a kid, the younger of two. My dad, Robert, worked at the John Deere plant. My mom, Karen, taught 3rd grade. My older sister, Amy, was the good one. Straight A's, choir, the whole deal. We weren't a super religious family, but we were Sunday morning church people. I wore stiff jeans and a clip-on tie, fidgeting through the sermons, counting the ceiling tiles. God was like a distant, kind uncle people talked about a lot, but who never really visited. The cracks started when I was 14. Dad lost his job when the plant downsized. He changed after that. The easy laughter that used to fill our garage while he tinkered with his old Chevy got replaced by a long, heavy silence. He started drinking, not a lot at first, just a few beers every night, but the weight of it was always there in the room. Mom tried to keep everything bright and normal, but her smiles got tight, like they were stretched too thin. Amy buried herself in college applications, desperate for an escape route. I just got angry. At the teachers who asked too many questions, at the kids who had newer things, at God for letting my dad sit in that recliner, empty and defeated. I found my own escape in a bottle of vodka stolen from Jimmy Fisher's dad's liquor cabinet. It tasted awful, burning my throat and making me cough. But what followed? That was a warmth, a silencing of the noise in my head, a feeling that I was finally in control of how I felt. It was a lie, of course, but it was a convincing one. By 16, I was good at the lie. I was the fun guy at parties, the one who could always get the stuff, who didn't care about curfew or consequences. My grades slipped. My old friends, the ones from youth group and baseball, drifted away. I told myself they were boring. I told myself I was free. One night, a week after my 17th birthday, I came home reeking of beer and smoke. Mom was waiting up, her face pale under the kitchen light. "Mike," she said, her voice trembling. "We're worried about you. We love you. This isn't you." "You don't know who I am," I'd shouted, the alcohol making me brave and cruel. "You and Dad just pretend everything's fine. It's not fine. Nothing is fine." I saw the hurt flash in her eyes, a wound I'd given her, and instead of making me sorry, it made me want to hurt more, to make someone feel the jagged chaos I felt inside. I stormed past her, knocking a framed picture of our family at the Iowa State Fair off the wall. The glass shattered on the hardwood floor. I didn't stop to clean it up. I just went to my room, slammed the door, and put my headphones on, blasting music to drown out the sound of my mother crying. That was the first time I saw myself as two people. There was the Mikey my grandma had known, the one who loved building forts and believed in Sunday school promises. And there was this new, angry creature called Mike, who broke things and liked the way it felt. I was pretty sure Mike was winning, and I was pretty sure God, if he was even paying attention, preferred Mikey. The problem was Mikey was gone. Led Character, Brenda Williams' other characters, random American names, not Leah, Sarah, Grace, Miller, David. The user has provided the lead character's name as Brenda Williams and requested other random American names, avoiding specific ones like Leah, Sarah, etc. The story needs to maintain the emotional depth and structural requirements outlined earlier. The opening hook already sets a powerful scene with the stranger calling the protagonist by their childhood name. Since the protagonist is now Brenda, I need to adjust the details to fit her perspective, changing the stolen vodka memory to something like nail polish remover, which feels more authentic for a young girl in the 90s. The family dynamics should reflect her experience as a daughter and sister, with parents Robert and Karen and sister Amy. The bus shelter scene remains the core moment, but now the stranger's line will be, "You look like you've had a long day, Bren-Bren." The childhood nickname should feel intimate and jarring, just as Mikey did in the original. The backstory needs to show Brenda's spiral, her father's job loss, the family's move, her rebellion through drinking and toxic relationships, and the eventual theft that isolates her. The chapter should end with her realizing the stranger knows her name, mirroring the original cliffhanger but tailored to Brenda's life. The emotional beats, shame, anger, the shock of recognition, must stay intact. I'll avoid spiritual cliches and keep the language simple and visceral, like the description of the hangover as a live wire attached to my temples. Chapter 1. The rain wasn't falling. It was throwing itself against the bus shelter glass, angry and cold. I hunched deeper into my coat, the one with the torn lining, watching the water swirl around the storm drain like it was trying to decide whether to drown or disappear. I was trying to decide the same thing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. And it wasn't from the chill. It was the 3-day hangover, the hollowed-out feeling that follows a binge when the money and the booze and the excuses are all gone. My phone was dead, had been for a day, cut off from the last person who still pretended to care. My sister. I'd burned every other bridge, soaked them in gasoline of lies and stolen money and watched them turn to ash. I was 34 years old, and I was a ghost. I'd left my rented room because the silence there was louder, full of the echoes of every promise I'd broken, most of all the ones I'd made to myself. So I'd walked, aimless, until the sky opened up. Now here I sat in a plastic chair that smelled of old urine and wet concrete at a bus stop on a street I didn't know, in a city that felt like a stranger. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my gut. This is it. This is the bottom, and there's no way back up. I felt beyond saving, not in a dramatic, movie-ending way, but in a quiet, final way, like a book that's been dropped in a puddle, the ink blurred beyond reading, the pages stuck together for good. A bus sighed to a stop, its doors opening with a mechanical wheeze. No one got off. The driver looked at me through the open door, a question on his face. I shook my head. He shrugged, the doors closed, and he pulled away, leaving me alone again with the drumming rain. That's when I heard footsteps, quick and light, splashing through the puddles. A figure darted into the shelter, shaking out a compact umbrella. A woman, maybe in her late 50s, with a kind, ordinary face and grocery bags in her hands. She gave me a small, polite smile, the kind you give a stranger you're sharing a temporary space with, and then looked out at the rain. I looked down at my worn-out boots, wishing I could vanish. I didn't need politeness. I felt unworthy of it. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the rain's roar. Then she spoke, not looking at me, her voice calm and clear above the storm. "You look like you've had a long day, Bren-Bren." The world stopped. The rain sound faded into a dull, distant hum. My breath caught in my throat, sharp as a fishhook. No one had called me Bren-Bren in 25 years, not since I was 9 years old, in my grandmother's kitchen in Ohio. My name was Brenda, Bren to the few people left. Bren-Bren was a ghost, a buried kid from a time before everything went wrong. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. She was looking at me now, her eyes a soft, steady brown. There was no shock on her face, no confusion, just a gentle, knowing certainty. But to understand how I got here, to this shattered moment where a stranger resurrected a dead name, I need to take you back to where it all began. Before I continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. It means the world to me to know who's hearing this story. It began in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I was just a kid, the younger of two. My dad, Robert, worked at the John Deere plant. My mom, Karen, taught 3rd grade. My older sister, Amy, was the good one. Straight A's, choir, the whole deal. We weren't a super religious family, but we were Sunday morning church people. I wore scratchy dresses and shiny patent leather shoes, fidgeting through the sermons, counting the panes in the stained glass window. God was like a distant, kind uncle. People talked about a lot, but who never really visited. The crack started when I was 14. Dad lost his job when the plant downsized. He changed after that. The easy laughter that used to fill our kitchen while he made Saturday morning pancakes got replaced by a long, heavy silence. He started drinking, not a lot at first, just a few beers every night. But the weight of it was always there in the room. Mom tried to keep everything bright and normal, but her smiles got tight, like they were stretched too thin. Amy buried herself in college applications, desperate for an escape route. I just got angry at the teachers who asked too many questions, at the girls who had nicer clothes, at God for letting my dad sit in that recliner, empty and defeated. I found my own escape not long after. It was at a sleepover at my friend Chloe's house. Her older brother Kyle had a bunch of friends over. They were passing around a bottle of something that smelled like nail polish remover. I felt nervous, but I felt more nervous about looking like a baby in front of them. So I took a sip. It was terrible, a fire that burned all the way down, but the feeling that came after, that was a warmth, a softening of all the sharp edges inside me. For a little while, I didn't feel angry or scared or less than. It was a lie, of course, but it was a convincing one. By 16, I was good at the lie. I was the fun girl at parties, the one who could laugh the loudest, who didn't care about curfew or consequences. My grades slipped. My old friends, the ones from youth group and track, drifted away. I told myself they were judging me. I told myself I was finally living. One night, a week after my 17th birthday, I came home, reeking of cheap wine and cigarette smoke. Mom was waiting up, her face pale under the kitchen light. "Brenda," she said, her voice trembling. "We're worried about you. We love you. This isn't you." "You don't know who I am," I'd shouted, the alcohol making me brave and cruel. "You and Dad just pretend everything's fine. It's not fine. Nothing is fine." I saw the hurt flash in her eyes. A wound I'd given her, and instead of making me sorry, it made me want to hurt more, to make someone feel the jagged chaos I felt inside. I stormed past her, knocking a ceramic cookie jar shaped like a rooster, my grandmother's, off the counter. It shattered on the linoleum floor, scattering shards and shortbread crumbs everywhere. I didn't stop. I just went to my room, slammed the door, and turned my music up so loud the bass vibrated in my chest, drowning out the sound of my mother's quiet sobs. That was the first time I saw myself as two people. There was the Bren-Bren my grandma had known, the one who loved braiding daisy chains and believed in Sunday school stories. And there was this new, angry creature called Brenda, who broke precious things and liked the numb feeling that followed. I was pretty sure Brenda was winning, and I was pretty sure God, if he was even paying attention, preferred Bren-Bren. The problem was Bren-Bren was gone, and as I sat in that bus shelter 2 decades later, drenched in the consequences of a life spent running, I knew she was never coming back, until a stranger with grocery bags looked at me and spoke her name. I stared at the woman in the bus shelter, my mouth slightly open. The rain poured down, sealing us into this little glass box. "What did you call me?" I finally managed, my voice a raspy thing I barely recognized. She just smiled, a little sad around the eyes. "The rain's letting up a bit," she said, as if she hadn't just reached into my chest and pulled out a memory I'd sealed shut. She gathered her grocery bags. "You take care of yourself, Brenda Williams." Before I could form another word, "How do you know my name? Who are you?" She stepped out into the damp, misty air, opened her umbrella, and walked away, turning the corner and disappearing as quietly as she'd come. I sat there, stunned, the name, Bren-Bren, ringing in my ears. It felt like a key turning in a rusted lock, a door I'd painted over and pretended wasn't there, cracking open just an inch. A violent shiver ran through me, part cold, part something else entirely. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and stepped out of the shelter. The rain had softened to a drizzle. I looked down the empty street where she'd gone. Nothing. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. The sound of her voice was too clear. The nickname was too specific. A deep, unsettling sense of being known, truly seen for the first time in years, wrapped around me. It wasn't a comfortable feeling. It was terrifying. When you've worked so hard to become nobody, being recognized as somebody is a shock to the system. I started walking, not back to my lonely room, but aimlessly, the encounter playing on a loop in my mind. To understand how staggering that moment was, you have to understand what came after, the night I broke my grandma's cookie jar. I didn't apologize. I woke up the next morning with a throbbing head and a deeper shame than any hangover could cause. I saw the clean, empty spot on the counter. Mom had swept up every last piece. She made pancakes, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Dad was already gone, probably out looking for work that didn't exist. We ate in a silence so thick you could choke on it. That silence became the new language of our house. Amy left for college at the University of Iowa that fall, and her absence felt like another death in the family. The house was quieter, emptier, and my anger had more room to grow. I started community college because it was expected, but I rarely went to class. I got a job as a waitress at a diner off the highway, and that's where I met Jake. Jake was 24, a line cook with tattoos snaking up his arms and a laugh that sounded like trouble. He was everything my safe, broken home wasn't. Exciting, reckless, and completely uninterested in my past. He called me Brenda, never Bren-Bren, and I loved him for it. He made me feel tough, grown up. He also introduced me to pills. "Just something to take the edge off, Bren," he'd say, handing me a little white one. "You think too much." And I did. I thought about my dad's hollow eyes, my mom's disappointment, the shattered cookie jar. The pills made the thoughts slow down, then stop. They made the world soft and hazy. It started as a weekend thing, then it was a Wednesday thing, then it was a every day I could afford it thing. By 19, I'd moved into Jake's apartment, a cramped place that always smelled of stale grease and smoke. I lost the diner job for being unreliable. Jake said it didn't matter, he'd take care of me. For a while, he did. We partied, we slept through days, we borrowed money from people we promised to pay back next week. We were a team, united against the boring, judgmental world. But the thing about building a life on a foundation of chemicals and lies is that it starts to crack. Jake's care turned to control. His laughter could turn sharp in a second. If I talked about maybe taking a class or calling my sister, he'd get cold. "Why? You think you're better than this? Better than me?" The pills weren't just for fun anymore. They were a necessity to avoid the withdrawals that made my bones feel like they were crawling under my skin. One night, I found a text on his phone from another woman. It was explicit. I confronted him, screaming, throwing the empty pill bottles that littered our nightstand. He didn't deny it. He just smirked. "What are you gonna do, Brenda? You got anywhere to go?" He was right. I didn't. I'd burned my bridges. My parents, in one of our last strained phone calls, had said they loved me but couldn't enable me anymore. They'd done their research. They called it tough love. It just felt like abandonment. Amy was busy with law school. I was alone. So I stayed. And things got worse. The lowest point in that apartment came on a Tuesday. I was out of pills, sick with wanting, and Jake was withholding them, angry about some minor argument. I was on the floor of the bathroom, shaking, sweating, crying. I looked at myself in the smudged mirror above the sink. My hair was greasy, my eyes were haunted. I didn't see Bren-Bren. I barely saw Brenda. I saw a desperate animal. In that moment, a prayer formed in my mind, not to God, but to the vague idea of the God I'd learned about as a kid. It wasn't elegant. It was a raw, silent scream. "If you're real, get me out of this. Just make it stop. Please." Nothing happened. No lightning bolt. No sudden peace. Jake kicked the bathroom door open an hour later and tossed a single pill at me. "Stop your bawling," he said. I scrambled for it on the dirty floor, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. The answer to my prayer seemed to be a resounding, cruel no. Or worse, silence. I took it as a sign. God wasn't listening. Or he was, and this was his answer. I was meant for this. I was too far gone. The Bren-Bren who might have been worth saving was dead. A month later, I finally left Jake. Not in a blaze of empowering glory, but in a coward's retreat. I waited until he was passed out, took the $80 I found in his jacket pocket, and left. I got on a Greyhound bus with no destination in mind. I ended up in Minneapolis because the ticket was cheap and the city was big enough to get lost in. The next decade was a blur of different rooms, different waitressing jobs, different ways to numb the pain. The pills got harder to find and more expensive, so I switched to whatever was cheapest and strongest, usually vodka. I learned to function in a permanent state of fog. I had brief, messy relationships with men who were variations of Jake. I lost jobs. I pawned anything of value I ever acquired. I built a life of quiet, desperate survival, punctuated by bursts of chaotic failure. My sister Amy was my only tether to the past. She'd call every few months. Her voice was always tight with worry. She'd tell me about her job as a public defender, about mom and dad getting older. She'd ask how I was. "I'm fine, Amy," I'd always say, the biggest lie of all. She'd send money sometimes. "For groceries," she'd say, but we both knew it was to keep my lights on. Every time I accepted it, I hated myself a little more. I was 34, and my little big sister was still trying to save me. The week before the bus shelter, it all fell apart. I'd been working at a laundromat, a mindless job of folding other people's sheets. I'd stolen $20 from the till, sure the owner wouldn't notice. He did. He fired me on the spot, called me a thief in front of a customer. That night, filled with shame and panic, I used my last $40 to buy a bottle and didn't stop drinking until I passed out. I woke up 2 days later to missed calls from Amy and an eviction notice from my landlord past due on rent for the second month. I called Amy back, my voice slurry. She listened, and for the first time, her voice didn't sound worried. It sounded exhausted. "Brenda, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep sending money. It's not helping you. Mom had a scare with her heart last month. Did I tell you that? No, because I was protecting you. I can't protect you from this, Bren. You have to want to stop." It felt like the last lifeline had been cut. I screamed at her, called her selfish, said she never understood. I hung up, I threw the bottle against the wall, and then, in the crushing silence that followed, I knew she was right. I didn't want to stop. I didn't know how, and I didn't think there was anything left on the other side of stopping worth living for. That's when I walked out into the rain. That's how I ended up in that bus shelter, a soaked-through woman with nothing and no one, finally accepting the story I'd told myself for years. I was beyond saving. And then a stranger with kind eyes and grocery bags called me Bren-Bren. I walked for hours until my feet were sore and the drizzle had stopped completely. The sky was dark now. I was back near my building. I stood outside, looking up at the window of my room, knowing the eviction notice was waiting on the other of that door. A profound, weary certainty settled over me. I couldn't go back up there. Not tonight. Not to that silence. But as I turned away from the building, a different thought, fragile as the first green shoot in cracked concrete, emerged. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was just a question. Who was that woman? And if she knew who I was, then maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely nobody. And if I wasn't nobody, then the story I'd believed for so long might be wrong. But if that story was wrong, then what was true? The question was so vast and frightening that I did the only thing I knew how to do. I walked to the only place still open, the 24-hour convenience store on the corner, and with my last $5, I bought the smallest, cheapest bottle of wine they had. The cardboard cylinder of the bottle felt like a verdict in my hand. I walked to a bench in a small, neglected pocket park a block from my building. The streetlight above it was broken, so I sat in the shadows. I cracked the screw top and took a long swallow. The wine was bitter and sharp, the kind that tastes like regret even before the buzz hits. I drank to silence the question, to drown out the sound of that name, Bren-Bren, which now echoed in the hollow places inside me. But it didn't work. For the first time in years, the alcohol didn't bring the numb silence I craved. Instead, it felt like pouring gasoline on a smoldering fire. The stranger's face, her calm eyes, her ordinary grocery bags. It all played behind my eyes, sharper and more real than the dark park around me. Who walks up to a soaked, broken-down stranger and calls them by a childhood nickname? A cop or a social worker would have used my legal name. A friend from the past wouldn't have just walked away. I took another swig, but the act felt hollow, mechanical. The cheap wine churned in my empty stomach. A memory surfaced, unbidden. My grandmother's hands, spotted with age, rolling out pie dough on her flour-dusted table. I was maybe 7, sitting on a stool, stealing bits of discarded crust. My little Bren-Bren, she'd say, not looking up from her work, her voice full of a warmth I didn't have to earn. God's got his eye on you, even when you're being a sneaky squirrel. I'd giggle, my mouth full of dough. It was a thing she said often, lightly, like, bless you after a sneeze. I hadn't thought of it in decades. God's got his eye on you. The thought now felt like an accusation, not a comfort. If that was true, then he'd seen everything, every theft, every lie, every morning I'd woken up wishing I hadn't. He'd seen me steal from the laundromat owner, Mr. Chen. A kind man who'd let me pay my rent late twice before. He'd seen me scream at Amy. He'd seen me on that bathroom floor scrambling for a pill. A wave of nausea rolled through me that had nothing to do with the wine. I put the bottle down on the bench beside me, half finished. I put my head in my hands. The prayer I'd thrown at the ceiling in Jake's bathroom came back to me. Get me out of this. Make it stop. I'd taken the pill he gave me as God's answer. But what if? What if the getting out wasn't supposed to be a dramatic rescue? What if it was a long, painful walk? And what if I'd been refusing to take the first step for 15 years? No, I said aloud to the empty park. This was the wine talking. This was guilt and exhaustion and a weird coincidence with a stranger. That's all it was. But the name, Bren-Bren, it was a key. And it had turned something. I felt a terrifying sense of urgency, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff I'd only just noticed. Going back to my room meant facing the eviction notice, facing the absolute end of the road. Staying on this bench meant finishing the bottle and passing out in the park. Both options were just different versions of the same end. I thought of the woman's grocery bags. They had been from a Kroger. I'd seen the logo. There was a 24-hour Kroger about a mile away, in a better part of town. It was a stupid, impossible thought. Go find a stranger in a Kroger, at night, based on a 5-minute interaction? Yet the alternative was unthinkable. The need to know to follow this thread wherever it led, even if it led nowhere, was suddenly stronger than my need to disappear. It was a feeling I didn't recognize. It felt like a choice. I stood up, leaving the half-empty bottle on the bench. The movement made me lightheaded. I hadn't eaten in over a day. I started walking, my wet clothes still clinging to me. The night air was cold, and I hugged myself as I walked, my mind racing. What would I even say? Excuse me, are you the woman who knew my name? She'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was. It took me 40 minutes to walk to the Kroger. The bright fluorescent lights of the supermarket were jarring. I felt like a creature from the shadows, bleary-eyed and disheveled. I wandered the aisles, my heart pounding. I didn't see her. Of course I didn't. It was a huge store. She could be anywhere in the city. This was a fool's errand. I was in the cereal aisle, defeated, ready to turn and walk back into the night when I saw a short, older man stocking boxes of oatmeal. He had a kind face. An employee badge read, Stan. Without thinking, I approached him. My voice came out weak. Excuse me? He turned and smiled. Can I help you find something, ma'am? I faltered. How to explain? I'm looking for someone. A woman. She was shopping here earlier, I think. Maybe around late afternoon. She had grayish hair, in a bob, and a navy blue raincoat. She bought groceries. It was the vaguest description in the world. Stan's polite smile didn't fade, but his eyes held a hint of caution. I knew how I looked. Lots of folks fit that description, he said gently. Was she a friend? No, I whispered. She knew my name, and I don't know how. The words hung in the air between us. Stan's expression softened from customer service polite to something more genuine, more curious. He studied my face for a second. That's unusual, he said. He didn't seem to think I was crazy. He seemed to be thinking. You know, he said slowly. Martha from the bakery counter. She's been here 30 years, knows half the neighborhood. She was working the afternoon shift. If your lady is a regular, Martha might know. She's just clocking out now, I think. He pointed towards the front of the store. Near the exit, by the bakery display case now covered with cling film, a woman in a flour-dusted apron was taking off a hairnet. She was round-faced and looked tired. A bolt of fear shot through me. This was it. This was the moment the thread either connected to something or snapped. Thank you, I mumbled to Stan, and I walked towards the bakery woman, my legs feeling like wood. Martha? I said as I got closer. She turned, giving me a once-over. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Yes, honey, we're closed. Bread's all put away. I'm not here for bread. I took a shaky breath. Stan said you might be able to help. I'm looking for a woman who shops here. She helped me today. I need to thank her." It was a thin story, but it was all I had. Martha folded her arms. "What's she look like?" I gave the same vague description. Martha shook her head. "Sounds like 100 ladies." Then she paused. "Though, Claire sometimes wears a coat like that. Claire Miller. She's here every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork. Buys a loaf of sourdough and always asks about my grandkids. Real kind lady. Teaches Sunday school over at Redeemer, I think." Claire Miller. Redeemer. The names were anchors in the swirling chaos of my mind. Do you know where she lives?" Martha's friendly demeanor cooled instantly. "I'm not giving out a customer's address, honey. That's not right. If you're a friend, you'd know how to find her." I was losing her. Desperation clawed at my throat. "Please," I said, and my voice broke. The tears I'd been holding back for days, maybe for years, started to spill over. I didn't try to hide them. "She called me by a name no one has called me since I was a little girl. I need to know why. I have nothing else. Please." Martha's stern expression melted into one of deep pity. She looked at me, really looked, at my wet, dirty clothes, my red-rimmed eyes, my trembling hands. She sighed, a heavy sound. "I can't give you an address," she repeated firmly. But then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, folded church bulletin. She handed it to me. "Redeemer Lutheran. Service is at 10 on Sunday. Claire's always there. Front left pew, halfway up. She likes to be near the window." I took the bulletin as if it were a lifeline. The paper was crisp. On the cover was a simple cross and the words, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew something. The verse I'd learned as a kid. "Thank you," I breathed. Martha nodded, her eyes still soft with concern. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," she said, but it sounded less like a platitude and more like a command spoken in faith. Then she turned and walked towards the employee door. I stood alone under the harsh lights, clutching the church bulletin. I had a name. I had a place. And I had 2 days until Sunday. The cliffhanger of my life was no longer about whether I would jump, but whether I had the courage to walk towards a strange church and a woman named Claire. And I had no idea what I would do between now and then. My room was an ending. This bulletin felt like a possible, terrifying beginning. But the hours in between? They were a vast, empty canyon I had to cross. And the only bridge I'd ever known, the bottle, the numbness, was one I suddenly, desperately didn't want to use. For the first time, the thought of drinking made me feel more afraid than the thought of being sober with my own thoughts. I walked out of the Kroger into the night. I had no home to go to, but I had a destination 2 days from now. The problem was I didn't know if I would survive the journey there. The 2 days between that Kroger parking lot and Sunday morning were the longest and shortest of my life. I had nowhere to go. The eviction notice on my door was a final barrier I couldn't face, so I walked. I walked until the sun came up, my body moving on autopilot, fueled by adrenaline and a strange, feverish clarity. The wine had fully worn off, and the cravings came like tidal waves. A deep, physical ache for something to smooth the sharp edges of reality, followed by a shuddering revulsion at the thought of it. It was a civil war inside my own skin. I ended up, as dawn broke pale and cold, outside the laundromat where I'd been fired. Mr. Chen was inside, already mopping the floor. I watched him through the glass for a long time. He was a small man, always neat, with a wedding ring he polished on his apron. I thought of the $20. The shame was a hot coal in my stomach. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pushed the door open. The bell jingled. Mr. Chen looked up and his face immediately closed off, becoming polite and blank. "Brenda, you cannot be here." "I know," I said, my voice rough. I didn't move further in. I reached into the pocket of my jeans, the ones that were still damp from the day before. I had exactly $4.27 and change, scavenged from the bottom of my bag. I walked to the counter and put it down in a sad little pile of quarters and dimes. "It's not $20. It's all I have right now. I'm sorry I took it." He looked from the money to my face, his expression unreadable. He didn't take it. "Why you come back?" The simple question undid me. "I don't have anywhere else to go," I whispered, the truth tumbling out. "And I need to be somewhere on Sunday morning, and I just have to get until then." He was silent for a full minute, the only sound the hum of a single industrial dryer. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "You sleep in back room," he said finally, not looking at me. "Is not good, is dirty, but is warm. You can stay until Sunday morning, then you go, and never come back to steal from me." Tears blurred my vision. This was not grace as I'd ever imagined it. It was hard, practical, and laced with a justified sternness. It cost him something, his peace, his trust. A clean back room, it cost me everything, my pride, my last few dollars, my last excuse. "Thank you," I choked out. He nodded, then pointed a finger at me. "No drinking, no drugs, I smell it. You go, I call police." I nodded, a frantic, childlike motion. The back room was exactly as he described, a cramped space with a concrete floor smelling of detergent and dust, stacked with broken washing machine parts and old invoices. He brought me a thin, clean moving blanket and a bottle of water. "I open at 7. You must be gone by 6:30. No customers see you." I spent Friday curled on that hard floor, shaking. The physical withdrawal was a special kind of hell. Sweats, chills, a restlessness in my limbs that made me want to crawl out of my body. But worse was the mental onslaught. Every mistake, every person I'd hurt played on a hellish highlight reel behind my eyes. My father's silent disappointment. My mother's tears, Amy's exhausted voice, Jake's smirk, the shattered cookie jar, the stolen $20. The memories were so vivid I could smell them. Stale beer. My grandmother's pie, the chemical tang of fear. I didn't pray. I just endured. I held on to the church bulletin like a talisman, running my fingers over the printed words. "Come to me, all who are weary." I was so weary, my bones felt like ash. But coming felt impossible. Who was I to come? On Saturday afternoon, Mr. Chen cracked the door open. He didn't come in. He slid a paper plate onto the floor with 2 plain cheese sandwiches on white bread and a small bag of potato chips. He said nothing and closed the door. The kindness of it, silent and uncompromising, made me weep. I ate the food slowly, each bite a struggle, knowing it was fuel for the journey to a place I was terrified to go. By Sunday morning, the worst of the physical sickness had passed, leaving a hollowed-out, raw-nerved version of myself. At 6:15 a.m., I folded the blanket neatly. I splashed water on my face from the utility sink. I had no clean clothes, so I wore the same jeans and sweater, now wrinkled and smelling of dust and sweat. I looked in a sliver of broken mirror leaning against the wall. A gaunt, pale stranger with huge, haunted eyes looked back. Bren-Bren was not in that face. Brenda, the broken one, was. I slipped out the back door, just as the sky was lightening to a soft gray. Mr. Chen was at the front, turning on lights. He didn't acknowledge me leaving. I didn't say goodbye. The transaction was complete. Redeemer Lutheran was a modest brick building with a peaked roof and a simple wooden cross, nestled on a tree-lined street in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't the big, modern church of my childhood. It looked old and settled. People were streaming in, families with little girls in frilly dresses, older couples holding hands, a few people my age looking comfortable and clean. I stood across the street, hidden behind a large oak tree, paralyzed. "What are you doing?" the voice in my head sneered, the voice that sounded like Jake, like my own shame. "You think you belong in there? You'll ruin the air. You're a thief, a liar, a drunk. They'll see you and know." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a mistake, a colossal, humiliating mistake. I should turn and run. I still had a few coins. I could get a coffee, just sit somewhere, forget this ever. The memory of Claire Miller's voice cut through the panic. "You look like you've had a long day, Bren-Bren." It had been a statement of fact, without condemnation. She had seen the long day, the long life, etched on my face, and had not looked away. Before I could think, my feet were moving. I crossed the street, head down, and climbed the stone steps. The door was heavy. I pulled it open and slipped inside. The inside was warm and softly lit, smelling of wood polish and old books. A few people mingled in the back. A narthex my brain supplied from a deep memory. A man in a suit shook hands near the door. I ducked my head and walked quickly past into the sanctuary. It was as Martha had said, front left pew, halfway up. There she was, Claire Miller. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her gray hair styled neatly. She was reading a hymnal, her posture peaceful. Just an ordinary woman. My legs carried me forward as if pulled by a magnet. I slid into the pew right behind her. The wood creaked. She didn't turn around. The organ started playing a prelude, something solemn and beautiful that vibrated in my chest. The service began. I stood when others stood, sat when they sat, a mute ghost following motions. The words of the liturgy were familiar echoes from a lifetime ago. When we got to the confession, the pastor read a line. "We have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed, by what we have done and by what we have left undone." It was a checklist of my life. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in. This was too much. The peace everyone else seemed to feel here was a wall I couldn't scale. As the congregation sat for the sermon, I knew I couldn't stay. I had to get out. I rose clumsily, stepping out into the aisle to make an escape for the back door. And that's when Claire Miller turned. Her eyes met mine. There was no surprise. It was as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She didn't smile. She just looked at me with a depth of knowing that rooted me to the spot. Then quietly, so only I could hear it over the organ's swell, she spoke. "It's okay, Brenda," she said. "The song is almost over, then we'll talk." I stood frozen in the aisle, every eye in the church surely on my back, trapped not by judgment, but by a kindness I could not comprehend. The cliffhanger was no longer about finding her, but about what terrifying, gracious words she would say when the final hymn was sung. I sat back down. Not because I wanted to, but because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. The pastor began his sermon, but his words were a distant murmur, a river flowing around a rock. I was the rock. All my awareness was fixed on the back of Claire Miller's head, on the sensible blue dress, on the impossible fact that she was here, and she knew I was here, and she had promised to talk. The sermon ended. A final hymn was announced. People stood, flipping pages in their hymnals. Claire turned slightly, offering me a shared book. Her finger pointed to the line, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness." I didn't sing. My throat was sealed shut. But I watched the words, and they felt like an accusation. I had built my hope on nothing, and it had collapsed into nothing. The benediction was spoken, a chorus of "Amen" echoed, and people began to shuffle out, chatting about lunch plans and the weather. Claire turned fully to face me. Her eyes held mine. They were the same steady brown. But now I saw lines of grief and laughter around them, the map of a long life. "Let's go somewhere quieter," she said, her voice still that same calm, clear tone. It wasn't a question. I followed her, mute, like a scolded child. We walked out a side door into a small, sun-dappled courtyard with a stone bench. The spring air was cool and clean. She sat, smoothing her dress, and patted the space beside her. I sat, leaving a careful foot of space between us. The silence stretched. She didn't seem in a hurry to break it. She just waited, watching a sparrow hop along the paving stones. "How did you know my name?" I finally blurted out, the question tearing from me. "The nickname. No one calls me that. No one has since I was a kid." Claire folded her hands in her lap. She didn't look at me. "I knew your grandmother. Eleanor Williams." The world tilted again. "Nana? You knew Nana?" She nodded. "We were in a prayer group together, for years, at First Methodist back in Cedar Falls." A small, fond smile touched her lips. "She talked about her grandchildren all the time. Amy, the fierce little lawyer-to-be, and her Bren-Bren, her sweet, sensitive Bren-Bren who felt things so deeply it scared her sometimes." A sob hit my chest, a physical punch. I clapped a hand over my mouth to hold it in. Nana had seen that. She had named the chaos inside me before I even knew what it was. "She died when I was 16, I whispered through my fingers. "I know," Claire said softly. "She was my friend. I grieved for her." She turned to look at me then, her gaze direct. "And I've prayed for you, Brenda, every Tuesday for the last 18 years. Since the week after her funeral. The air left my lungs. 18 years. Through Jake, through the pills, through the bus ride to Minneapolis, through the stolen $20. Every Tuesday. A prayer I never felt, never knew about, had been ticking in the background of my life like a heartbeat I'd forgotten how to hear. "Why?" The word was ragged. "You didn't know me. I was just a name to you." "You were a name on your grandmother's heart," she corrected gently. "And when she was dying, she asked our group, 3 of us old ladies, to keep praying for you. Specifically for you, she said. She said you had a tender heart that the world might try to harden. She asked us to pray it wouldn't succeed." Claire's eyes glistened. "I promised her I would. The other 2, Mary and Joan, they've passed on now. So it's just been me for a while." I couldn't process it. It was too big. A promise made to a dying woman, kept faithfully for nearly 2 decades, a thread of grace stitched through the fabric of my disaster. It made no sense. It was the most nonsensical, wasteful, beautiful thing I'd ever heard. "I'm not who she thought I was," I said, the bitterness rising like bile. "The world did harden it. It's not tender. It's ruined. I'm an addict. I'm a thief. I've hurt everyone who ever loved me. Your prayers, they didn't work." I meant it to push her away, to make her see the reality of the wasted woman before her. Claire didn't flinch. "My prayer wasn't that you would have an easy life, Brenda. It was that you would find your way home, however long it took, however far you wandered." She reached into her purse, a simple leather bag, and pulled out a worn, small index card. The edges were soft. She handed it to me. On it, in faded, elegant handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's, was a verse. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. Underneath, in different pens over the years, were dates and tiny notes. "Brenda, 19 today. Job interview. Moving to MPLS. Lord, hold her." The last entry was just 4 days old. "Your eye is on the sparrow. Let her see it." I stared at the card, the physical evidence of a love that had outlasted death, of a faithfulness that had persisted through my every failure. My tears fell then, hot and silent, splashing on the worn paper. I wasn't just crying for me, I was crying for Nana, for this stranger who kept a promise, for the sheer, stubborn weight of a love I had done nothing to deserve. "I saw you 3 days ago," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the bus shelter. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. I've seen a lot of people in pain. But when I saw you, I don't know how to explain it. I just knew. It was you, Eleanor's Bren-Bren, all grown up and so lost. And the name just came out. I almost didn't say it. I almost just gave you my umbrella and walked on. But I felt this nudge, so I spoke it." She took a deep breath. "I came to church today asking God for a sign. Should I have done more? Should I have stopped? Was I crazy? And then you walked in and sat behind me." She gave a soft, wondering laugh. I guess that was my answer. I handed the card back to her, my hands trembling. "I don't know what to do now," I confessed. The admission more terrifying than any withdrawal. "I have no job. I got evicted. I've been sleeping in a laundromat storage room. My sister won't talk to me. I'm empty." Claire nodded, as if I'd simply told her it might rain later. She put the card back in her purse. "Well," she said, practical as my grandmother once was. "First, you come home with me and have some lunch. Then we'll make a few calls. There's a women's shelter downtown, Naomi House, run by a friend of mine. It's not just a cot, it's a program. It has structure, rules, counseling." Hope, real hope, felt like a searing light. It hurt to look at. "Why would you do that for me? After what I just told you I am?" She stood up, offering me a hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Because 18 years ago, I loved a friend, and I love my friend still. And you are a piece of her. And because, she said, her eyes holding a depth of conviction that brooked no argument, I believe in a God who specializes in putting broken things back together. But he usually uses people's hands to do it. Today, it seems he might want to use mine. I followed her to her car, an old, sensible sedan. As she drove us to her small, tidy house on a quiet street, the cliffhanger wasn't about my survival anymore. It was about surrender. Could I, Brenda Williams, who trusted no one and nothing, except the helping hand of a stranger, the structure of a shelter, the weight of a grace that asked for nothing in return but my broken, willing heart? And deeper still, as I saw the welcome mat on her front porch, a new and more frightening question emerged. If I said yes, who would I even be on the other side? Bren-Bren was a ghost. Brenda was a wreck, what was left in the middle to build a life upon. Claire's house was a small yellow bungalow with white trim and a porch swing that moved gently in the breeze. Everything about it was orderly. The lawn was edged, the flower beds were mulched, and a stone bird bath stood in the center of the yard. It was the very picture of a life lived with care, and standing on her welcome mat, I felt like a mud stain on a clean carpet. "Come in, Brenda," she said, holding the door open. The inside smelled of lemon polish and something baking, something with cinnamon. It was a smell that spoke of safety and normality, and it made my chest ache. My apartment had smelled of stale takeout and hopelessness. She led me to a cozy kitchen with checkered curtains. "Sit," she instructed. Pointing to a wooden chair at a round table, "I made a pot roast, it's just finishing." She moved efficiently, setting out 2 plates, getting glasses for water. It was all so simple, so domestic. I hadn't shared a meal with anyone in... I couldn't remember. I sat, my hands folded in my lap, watching her. "You just had a pot roast ready?" I asked, my voice small. She glanced over her shoulder as she pulled a steaming dish from the oven. "I usually make one on Saturdays. Sundays are for leftovers. It's just me now. My husband Frank passed 5 years ago. Cancer." She said it plainly, a fact of life, not a bid for sympathy. So I'm used to cooking for 2 and eating for 1. Today, it works out. We ate in near silence for a few minutes. The food was delicious, tender meat, carrots, potatoes, but each bite felt like a lump in my throat. I was so unused to kindness that didn't have strings attached. With Jake, every meal came with a price, a mood, a demand, a debt. This was just given. "You don't have to do this," I said finally, pushing a potato around my plate. "I know," she replied, taking a sip of water. "But I want to. Now tell me about Naomi House. Are you willing to call?" I put my fork down. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. "What's it like?" "Strict," she said, not sugarcoating it. "Curfews, chores, random drug tests, required meetings, AA, NA, Bible study if you want, but that's optional, counseling sessions. They help you find a job, but you have to work. It's a 9-month program. No men, no overnight passes for the first 3 months. It's designed to rebuild a life from the ground up. It's hard." It sounded like prison. It sounded like salvation. Both. "What if I fail?" The question was a whisper. Claire met my eyes. "Then you fail. And you get up. And you try again somewhere else. But from what Martha at Kroger hinted, and from what I see in your eyes, I think you're more afraid of succeeding than failing." Her words sliced through me. She was right. Failing was my identity. It was familiar ground. Succeeding meant becoming someone new, someone unknown. It meant facing all the wreckage I'd left behind without the fog to hide in. "I'll call," I heard myself say. The words felt like they came from someone else. Claire nodded, as if she'd expected no other answer. She cleared the plates and brought over a cordless phone, placing it on the table between us. She set a sticky note with a number on it next to the phone. "Her name is Diane. Tell her Claire Miller referred you." My hand shook as I picked up the receiver. I dialed the number. It rang twice. "Naomi House, this is Diane." The voice was firm, no nonsense, but not unkind. "Hi, my name is Brenda Williams. Claire Miller gave me this number." I stumbled over the words. "Okay, Brenda, what can I do for you today?" There was a rustling of papers in the background. I think I need a place to stay and some help." Diane asked me a series of blunt, practical questions. Was I under the influence right now? Did I have any active warrants? Was I willing to comply with all program rules? Was I in any immediate physical danger? Each no felt like a small step on a tightrope. "We have an intake bed available tomorrow afternoon," Diane said finally. "Can you be here at 2 p.m.? Bring ID if you have it. Bring nothing else. We'll provide toiletries, clothing, bedding. You come with the clothes on your back and a willing heart. That's it. Tomorrow." It was so soon. "Yes," I choked out. "I'll be there." She gave me the address. I repeated it back, my hand scribbling on Claire's sticky note. We hung up. I sat there, holding the dead phone, the reality of the decision crashing over me. "I have to be there tomorrow at 2, I said, more to myself than to Claire. "Good," she said. "You can stay in my guest room tonight. I'll give you a ride tomorrow." I looked up at her, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing all this? The lunch, the bed, the ride. You don't even know me." Claire leaned back in her chair. "When Frank was sick," she began slowly. "At the very end, he was in so much pain. He couldn't do anything for himself. I had to bathe him, feed him, everything. I was so tired, Brenda. So angry at God, if I'm honest. One night, I was just weeping by his bed, feeling completely alone. A nurse's aide, a young woman named Chloe, came in. She didn't say a word. She just put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed. Then she took the washcloth from my hand and finished washing Frank's face, so gently. She gave me the gift of being a wife in that moment instead of a nurse. She saw my broken heart and did a small, practical thing. It felt like a message. Claire's eyes were soft with the memory. I learned then, that God's love usually shows up wearing skin. It has hands that wash feet and make pot roast and give rides to shelters. Today it's my turn to wear the skin. She stood up. Now let's get you a shower and some clean clothes. Frank had a sister about your size. I've kept some of her things. The guest room was simple. A double bed with a quilt, a dresser, a cross on the wall. Claire laid out a pair of soft yoga pants, a t-shirt, and a sweatshirt. She pointed me to the bathroom across the hall. Take your time. There are fresh towels on the rack. The hot water was a miracle. I stood under the spray, watching 2 days of grime and fear swirl down the drain. I scrubbed my hair with Claire's lavender-scented shampoo until it squeaked. When I got out, wrapped in a fluffy towel, I avoided the mirror. I wasn't ready to look yet. I put on the clean clothes. They were soft, smelling of cedar and detergent. They felt like a disguise. When I emerged, Claire was in the living room, reading a book. She looked up. There's Bren-Bren, she said softly. It didn't feel like a lie this time. It felt like a hope, a distant point on a map I was trying to navigate toward. That night, lying in the strange, clean bed, the darkness was absolute and quiet. The cravings whispered to me, a siren song of familiar numbness. One last time, the voice hissed, "You could slip out. Find a way. Ease the terror of tomorrow." I clenched my fists in the sheets, sweating. This was the canyon, the terrifying space between the decision for change and the first real step. I thought of the index card. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Was he close to this heart, pounding with fear in a stranger's house? I didn't feel it. I felt alone. But for the first time, the alone felt chosen. I had chosen to be here, in this quiet room, instead of on the street. That had to count for something. I must have slept, because the next thing I knew, gray morning light was filtering through the curtains. Claire drove me to Naomi House in silence. The building was a large former convent made of red brick, looking solid and stern. She pulled up to the curb. "This is as far as I go," she said. "This path is yours to walk." She reached into her purse and handed me a new, simple index card. On it, she had written a single verse. "For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." Isaiah 43:19. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. It was all I could manage. "I'll be praying, Brenda, every Tuesday." She gave me a smile that held both compassion and steel. "Now go. Your new thing is waiting." I got out of the car. She drove away. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the imposing doors of Naomi House. The cliffhanger was no longer about going in. I would go in. The real tension coiled inside me as I climbed the steps, my hand reaching for the heavy door handle. What if the new thing God was making was too hard? What if the wilderness inside me was too vast and the river was just a mirage? I was trading one unknown for another, and as the door buzzed open, I realized I was more terrified of the structured, scrutinizing light of recovery than I ever was of the dark. The door clicked shut behind me with the sound of terrifying finality. I was in a small, brightly lit entryway with a linoleum floor that smelled of antiseptic. A window of thick, reinforced glass separated me from a woman at a desk. She looked up, her eyes appraising me without judgment. It was the voice from the phone, Diane. She buzzed me through a second door. "Brenda Williams, right on time." Diane was in her 50s, with short, steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of story. She wore a simple sweater and slacks. "Let's get you processed. This way." The next hour was a blur of paperwork, rules recited in a monotone, and a thorough search of my person. They took the clothes Claire had given me, bagging them to be stored. They issued me 2 sets of donated sweats, underwear, socks, a toothbrush, a comb. Everything was clean, plain, utilitarian. I was a number, a new intake. It was dehumanizing in a way that felt strangely necessary. The persona of Brenda, the tough survivor, the charming mess, meant nothing here. I was stripped bare in every sense. Diane led me down a hallway to a dormitory room. It held 4 single beds, each neatly made with a gray blanket. 2 were occupied with personal items, a stuffed animal on one, a stack of books on another. "You're here," Diane said, pointing to an empty bed by the window. "Roommates are at group session. You'll meet them at dinner. Curfew is 9 p.m., lights out at 10, breakfast at 6:30 a.m. Chore assignments are on the board in the common room. You'll start tomorrow." She handed me a printed schedule. Every hour was accounted for. The first week is observation, no outside contact, focus on settling in and not leaving. Her gaze softened a fraction. The first few days are the hardest. Your body and mind are going to fight the new routine. Use the support here. Don't try to white-knuckle it alone. Then she left. I stood in the center of the room, holding my bundle of issued items. The silence was profound. I made my bed, folding the hospital corners as instructed in the orientation packet. I put my few things in the small footlocker at the end of the bed. I sat on the thin mattress, and then the walls began to close in. It wasn't the craving first. It was the silence, the absence of chaos. For years, my life had been a symphony of crises, overdrawn accounts, looming evictions, angry voices, the next score. That noise had been my soundtrack, distracting me from myself. Here, there was only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner. In that quiet, the memories rushed in, not as a highlight reel, but as a tidal wave. I saw my father's hands, calloused from the plant, trembling as he poured his first beer at 10 a.m. I saw my mother's face the day I told her I was moving in with Jake, the hope dying in her eyes. I felt the cold slickness of the bathroom floor in Jake's apartment against my cheek. I heard the crack of the cookie jar hitting the linoleum. The shame was physical, a nausea that had me hunched over, gripping the edge of the mattress. "This is a mistake!" the voice screamed. "You can't do this! You don't deserve this! You're just a junkie, a thief! You'll fail here too!" Before I could drown in it, the door opened. 2 women walked in. The first was my age, with a sharp, wary face and tattoos covering her arms. She glanced at me, nodded once, and went to the bed with the stuffed animal, a faded unicorn. The second was younger, maybe early 20s, with anxious eyes and bitten nails. She went to the bed with the books. The older woman spoke first. "You the new intake? Brenda?" I nodded. "I'm Pam." "That's Zoe." She sat on her bed, pulling off her shoes. "Dinner in 20, meatloaf. It's edible on Tuesdays. Avoid the fish on Fridays." Her matter-of-fact tone was a lifeline. "Thanks," I managed. Zoe offered a timid smile. "The first night is the worst, but you sleep through it, and then it's just one day at a time. That's what they say." The cafeteria was a loud, echoing room. Women of all ages and backgrounds lined up with trays. I saw hollow eyes, hopeful eyes, tired eyes. I saw scars on wrists, track marks on arms, the weary slump of shoulders that had carried too much. I wasn't unique here. I was just another broken vessel. The realization was both humbling and a relief. I sat with Pam and Zoe. Pam spent dinner dissecting the facility's plumbing problems with the expertise of someone who'd been in a lot of institutions. Zoe picked at her food, her knee bouncing under the table. No one asked my story. No one offered theirs. There was an unspoken rule: you share when you're ready, in group, not over meatloaf. The first week was a special kind of agony. The physical cravings had passed, but the mental obsession was a constant gnawing. My body screamed for the chemical peace it knew so well. My emotions were a raw, exposed nerve. A misplaced word from a staff member could send me into a rage. A kindness from Zoe could make me weep uncontrollably. I was an infant in a grown woman's body, learning to feel all over again. Group therapy was the crucible. We sat in a circle in a bland meeting room. Diane facilitated. The first time it was my turn to check in, I froze. "My name is Brenda, and I'm an addict," was all I could force out, parroting the required phrase. "And how are you feeling, Brenda?" Diane asked, her voice gentle but insistent. I stared at my hands. "I don't know," I whispered. It was the truth. I had spent so long numbing feelings that identifying them was like trying to name colors in the dark. Days bled into a week, then 2. The structure was a cage that slowly became a skeleton holding me upright. I scrubbed toilets. I attended job readiness workshops. I sat through AA meetings in the basement, listening to stories that mirrored my own. I heard the Serenity Prayer so many times it started to etch itself on my heart. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The wisdom part was what I lacked. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't change the hurt I'd caused. That acceptance felt like surrender to a mountain of grief. The thing I could change, me, right now, felt impossibly small. One Tuesday afternoon, 4 weeks in, I was assigned to help in the kitchen. I was peeling a mountain of potatoes, my mind a numb blank, when Pam walked in to get a mop. She leaned against the stainless steel counter. "You got a visitor," she said, her tone neutral. My heart leapt. Claire? Had she come? It's not who you think, Pam said, reading my face. It's your sister, Amy. She's in the visiting parlor. The potato and peeler clattered into the sink. My hands were suddenly slick with cold sweat. Amy, I hadn't spoken to her since that last terrible phone call. Diane hadn't contacted her. I'd given no permission. How did she find me? You don't have to go, Pam said quietly. You can say no. But I knew I did have to go. This was the first real test of the new thing, the wilderness pathway. It was one thing to be sober in the safe bubble of Naomi House. It was another to face the living, breathing consequence of my old life. I wiped my hands on my apron, my breath coming in short gasps. Diane met me at the door of the visiting room, a small sunny space with a few plastic chairs. She called the shelter looking for you. Since you're an adult and she's immediate family, we confirmed you were here and safe. You have 20 minutes. I'll be right outside. I pushed the door open. Amy sat in a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked older than I remembered, more like our mother. She wore a lawyer's sensible blazer and an expression of such profound caution it was like a wall. We stared at each other across the gulf of 3 months, of 10 years, of a lifetime. Hi, she said, her voice flat. Hi. I stayed standing near the door. Mom and Dad, we've been worried. I called every hospital, every morgue. She trailed off, a muscle in her jaw tightening. Then I remembered you once mentioned a shelter called Naomi House in a city you were in. I called everyone in the state. This was the third. She'd been looking for me. The thought was staggering. I'm in a program, I said, gesturing vaguely. 9 months. I see that. Her eyes scanned my donated sweats, my clean, bare face. Are you sober? 34 days, I said, and a fragile pride flickered in my chest. A nod. That was all. No smile. No, I'm proud of you. Just a nod. The wall remained. Why are you here, Amy? I asked, the words more blunt than I intended. She looked down at her hands, at the simple gold band on her finger. I'm getting married, she said. In 6 months. To Mark. You met him once, years ago. I had a vague memory of a quiet man with kind eyes at some family barbecue I'd shown up to late and already buzzed. I'd probably been rude. Congratulations, I said, the word tasting like dust. She took a deep breath, looking directly at me, and her eyes finally filled with the pain I'd caused. I want you to be there, Brenda. But I can't. I won't have what happened at Mom's birthday happen at my wedding. I won't spend the day waiting for you to pass out or start a fight. I won't have Mark's family see that. Her voice trembled with the effort to stay controlled. So, I'm here to ask you, not as my sister, but as someone who needs to know for her own peace. Are you going to stay in this program? Are you really trying? Or is this just another pause? Her question hung in the air, the cruelest and most fair one anyone could ask. It held no faith in me. It held only a desperate need for a reliable answer. The cliffhanger wasn't about my survival anymore. It was about whether I could look my sister in the eye with 34 days of fragile sobriety and give her a promise that was worth anything at all. The weight of her doubt threatened to crush the fledgling hope inside me, and I didn't know if my new, untested strength could bear it. Amy's question, "Are you really trying?" hung between us like a blade. It wasn't asked in hope, but in self-defense. She needed a solid thing to build her plans on, and I had never been anything but shifting sand. The old me would have gotten angry, would have shouted that she didn't understand, that she was judging me, that she was just like everyone else. The old me would have used her doubt as an excuse to run straight back to the numbness. But the old me was 34 days behind me. The woman standing there in donated sweats had scrubbed toilets on her hands and knees, and had learned to sit with shame in a circle of folding chairs until it lost some of its power. She had nothing to offer but the raw, unproven truth. I don't know, I said. The words were quiet, stark, and they made Amy flinch as if I'd shouted. I don't know if this is just a pause. I want it not to be. But I can't promise you anything, Amy. My promises aren't worth anything. I took a shaky step forward, my hands open at my sides. All I can tell you is that I'm here, and I'm sober today, and I plan to be sober tomorrow. And a woman who prayed for me for 18 years without me knowing it believes that's enough for now. I'm trying to believe it too. Tears welled in Amy's eyes, but they didn't fall. The wall was cracking, but it was still there, built brick by brick over years of letdowns. 18 years? She whispered. I told her then. About Claire, about Nana's prayer group, about the index card, about the bus shelter. It was the first time I'd shared the full story, and as I spoke, I saw my journey reflected in my sister's face. The disbelief, the wonder, the dawning. Hesitant comprehension that something other than our own broken family history had been at work. When I finished, the room was silent. Amy looked out the window, blinking rapidly. She loved you so much, she finally said, her voice thick. Nana, she saw it in you, even when you were little. The thing that needed protecting. I think, I said slowly, carefully. Maybe that thing wasn't just in me. Maybe it was the part of me that belongs to something else. Something that doesn't give up. I couldn't say God to her yet. It felt too big, too claimed by a world of easy answers I didn't have. Amy stood up. Our 20 minutes were gone. She picked up her purse, a simple leather bag that looked like it could hold files and a life. She wasn't hugging me. She wasn't inviting me to the wedding. The ceremony is October 15th, she said. Businesslike again, but the edge was gone from her voice. At Community Presbyterian in Cedar Falls. It's at 2 p.m. She met my eyes. If you're still in the program, they give passes for things like that, don't they? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Then if you're still here and you want to come, you can. You'd sit with Mom and Dad. No +1. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. Old rules. I understand, I whispered. She walked to the door, then paused. Brenda? Yeah? Bren-Bren, that's what Nana called you. It wasn't a question, it was an acknowledgement, a handing back of a piece of our shared history I thought she'd forgotten. Then she left. I stood in the empty visiting parlor, trembling. It wasn't a victory, it was a door left open a crack, with a very clear view of the steep, narrow path I had to walk to get to it. The months that followed were the real work. The pink cloud of early sobriety evaporated, replaced by the gritty reality of rebuilding a person. I got a job, part-time, washing dishes at a soup kitchen. It was humbling, but there was a rightness to it. I was cleaning up messes, starting with my own. I started individual counseling. I talked about Dad, about Jake, about the stolen $20. I wrote letters of apology I wasn't allowed to send yet, to my parents, to Mr. Chen, to old friends. The act of writing them was like lancing infected wounds. The poison drained out, slow and painful. I began to read the Bible, not because I had to, but because I was curious. The verses Claire had given me were my anchors. In the wilderness of my own making, I looked for the pathway, the river. Some days I saw it in the patience of my counselor, in the shared laughter with Zoe over a burned batch of cookies in life skills class, in the simple gift of a full night's sleep. Other days, it was just desert. 6 months into the program, I earned a weekend pass. My first visit was not to a party or a park, but to the Cedar Falls Cemetery. I stood before my grandmother's grave with Claire, who had driven me. The headstone was simple. Eleanor Williams, beloved wife, mother, Nana. Hi, Nana, I whispered. The spring grass was soft under my feet. I had no flowers. Instead, I placed a smooth river rock I'd found on the grounds on top of the headstone. I'm working on it. Thank you for not giving up on me. I thought of the index card, the decades of prayers. I'm sorry it took so long to hear you. Claire stood a respectful distance away, praying quietly. When I was done, she walked over and looped her arm through mine. She knew, Claire said. Somehow, I think she always knew you'd find your way. The next day, I stood on the porch of my parents' house. The same porch where I'd slammed the door so many times. My mother opened it before I could knock. Her hand flew to her mouth. Dad appeared behind her, his face wary, older, but his eyes the same blue I remembered. Mom. Dad. My voice was steady. I'm 9 months sober. I'm living in a transitional house now, part of the program. I have a job. I'm not asking for anything. I wanted to see you and to say I'm sorry for everything. They didn't hug me, not then, but they let me in. We had coffee in the same kitchen where the cookie jar had shattered. We talked about the weather, about Amy's wedding plans, about Dad's new part-time job at the hardware store. It was stiff, painfully polite, but it was a start, a new foundation, laid brick by careful brick. October 15th dawned clear and cold. I wore a simple navy blue dress Claire helped me pick out, one that fit the woman I was now, not the girl I'd been. I sat between my parents in the pew at Community Presbyterian. When Amy walked down the aisle on Dad's arm, radiant and sure, she looked at us. Her eyes found mine, and she gave a small, deliberate nod. It was permission. It was a fragile thread of grace. I didn't cry during the ceremony. I felt a profound, quiet joy, untainted by envy or regret. I was simply there, present in a moment I had no right to witness. A miracle of persistence. Theirs, God's, mine. At the reception in the church basement, Amy and Mark came to our table. She hugged Mom and Dad. Then she turned to me. The music was loud, the room buzzing. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and squeezed my hand hard. Her eyes said what words still couldn't. I see you. Keep going. Tonight I'm back in Minneapolis. I have a small apartment, my name on the lease. I work full-time at the soup kitchen, promoted to coordinating volunteers. Some days are hard. The whispers of the old life still come, but now I know them for what they are. Echoes, not prophecy. I keep the first index card from Claire in my top drawer. The verse from Isaiah is taped to my bathroom mirror. I am about to do a new thing. It's not a dramatic ending. There's no swell of music. I still go to meetings. I still call Claire every Tuesday. My relationship with my parents is a careful, tender thing. Amy and I text, mostly about mundane things. It's enough. The redemption didn't come in the bus shelter, though it started there. It didn't come in a blinding flash. It came in the daily choice to believe that the love which tracked me through 18 years of wilderness was stronger than the brokenness that defined me. It came in understanding that being saved wasn't a one-time event, but 1,000 tiny rescues. A stranger's courage, a sister's guarded hope, a grandmother's lasting faith, a God who made a pathway when I could only see walls. I thought I was beyond saving, until a stranger, guided by a promise and a nudge she couldn't ignore, called me by the name my grandmother used, the name that held the person I was meant to be before the world tried to harden me. She didn't just say my name, she reminded me I still had one, and that was the beginning of everything.